Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unbridled Equestrian Podcast. Today, we have our lovely guest, Annika McGivern, here, who specializes in performance psychology. And we are going to be talking about rider mindset, tips and tricks and tools to help you in the saddle and out of the saddle to ease anxiety, improve performance, and just overcome maybe fears that you might be having. So if you're the kind of rider who maybe feels really confident at home, but then you freeze up when you get to a show, or you feel great on the flat, but have developed some anxiety over fences, and has lots of tools to help with that. I'm very excited, and thank you so much for joining us.
It's so lovely to be here with you and your gorgeous little dog.
Yes, Tigger has a lot to say today, so if if she chimes in, she's just doing her co-host duty. She's like, there are three of us in this conversation, okay? Goodness. And so we're really lucky to have you here because Annika has actually just moved back from Ireland. Mm-hmm. You were there for 6 years, right? But you're an Islander originally. So welcome back.
Nice to be home.
And we're grateful to have you because I've already been to an event that you hosted recently for the community. It's just so nice to talk about these things that are impacting us, but so often we're kind of taught to knuckle through it and just, use positive thinking to try and work through an issue, but often that doesn't really cut it, right?
Totally.
And so maybe you could start off by sharing a little bit about how you got into this and what made it an area of interest for you.
Yeah, of course. Well, it all started for me because I grew up as an equestrian myself in 3-day eventing. And I did encounter little bits and pieces of performance psychology education. For example, little talks at upper-mental camps or rider camps, those types of things. But my real interest wasn't sparked until I was working as a working student in the States in Washington. I had a relatively new horse and I was moving up a level, and I fell off in my first 2 cross countries at that new level. And I experienced a pretty major drop in confidence immediately as a result of that. But it manifested itself in a really interesting way, which was that all of a sudden I felt like I couldn't see a distance to anything, like even a hole on the ground. That was really unsettling. Coach, I remember, really wasn't sure what to do with me. She was like, I don't know, you were fine 2 days ago and now you're not, This created this little kind of like whirlwind of changes where I went from not being able to see the distance to then sort of overriding, changing the way I was riding. And then very quickly, my horse suddenly started to stop. And he loved to jump. And so I very quickly went into a place of, I've forgotten how to ride, I've broken my horse, and it's all falling apart. So in that experience led me to go into sort of problem-solving mode and look for help. And I ended up working with a mental performance consultant who did sports psychology with riders. And he was able to help me in, I think it was like 3 phone calls, Wow. He was able to help me understand what was happening and how to fix it. And I was able to fix it really quickly.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so that was it just left a big impression on me.
Absolutely.
I was already doing a lot of coaching. And so I was interested immediately for myself, but also something to maybe use to help people I was coaching with, whom I also started to see, pretty frequent mental obstacles. And it just opened my eyes to this whole mental world of sport that was never really talked about clearly, and yet I was started to understand had a huge impact on our ability to do our sport. And so that's what quickly turned into a passion, and I decided a couple of years later to pursue that as a career.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, and it's so fascinating to me just how the mental piece is interwoven into absolutely everything, whether it's leading your horse, riding, but also in life, in business, in anything that we're doing. So much of it is our mindset, and a lot of it comes down to subconscious barriers that are existing. So if you suddenly can't see a distance, you didn't lose that ability overnight. You didn't lose the ability to ride. There's something in your subconscious that's holding you back, and it's amazing how sneaky, I guess, those things can be and how much they can be really impacting us, even if we don't. So I feel like for anybody listening, even if you haven't had a major event, but maybe you just have a little bit of elevated anxiety every time you go to put your foot in the stirrup, or I have clients apologize to me all the time that they're nervous. I'm like, oh my goodness, don't apologize at all. Like, it's a very normal and natural thing to be nervous. And it's interesting. I think it gets quite stigmatized in the sport. And if you're not like really gutsy and going for it, it can be, I don't know, it can be easy to either be hard on ourselves or for our coaches to maybe criticize us for not being brave enough or anything like that. And so I love this area, and it's something that I haven't had an opportunity to dig into much, but I'm really excited to chat and hear more about all that you do.
Fantastic.
Yeah, fabulous. So maybe to start, for anybody who's not familiar, can you describe a little bit about what performance psychology is when it comes to equestrian sports specifically?
So in the context of equestrian sport, it's really about understanding your own mind as an athlete, as a rider. And interestingly, a lot of the riders I work with don't necessarily identify as athletes. They think of their horse as the athlete. They're not sure what they are in the the picture, but they don't always resonate with the term athlete. But that's what you are, right? Whether or not you are actually seeking out competitive results in sport, if you look at the definition of athlete, it's someone who's engaging in sport. It doesn't have to be with a competitive focus. And equestrian is certainly a sport, and if you're engaging with it regularly, you are an athlete. And so in that sense, I really believe that all riders are athletes and benefit from understanding the mental part of that pursuit as would any other athlete. So performance psychology is really about understanding your own mind in the context of sport and performance, but it's broader than that, of course, because as we start to understand our own mind in the context of sport, there is all sorts of overlaps with other areas of our life, as you mentioned, business, parenting, just any kind of relationships that we have. So there's always a broader impact, I find. However, performance psychology is about understanding how to get your mind working with you instead of against you to pursue the goals that you have and achieve the goals that you have. And the interesting thing about the brain, as I find, is that if we don't have tools to get it working for us, its default mode often is to work against us.
Yeah, it's so tricky, right? Because our brain's job is really to protect us and keep us safe, but that's not what helps us thrive. Keeping us safe is really like backing off and not doing anything really new or novel or unfamiliar. So I love that you pointed that out and made that distinction, because it is really critical. It's amazing and shocking how frequently our brain will go into that kind of protection mode and do something that's totally counter to what we're actually trying to achieve. Very frustrating.
Totally. Very frustrating. And it's particularly interesting to me how that impacts us as equestrians, because riding is inherently dangerous. And so our brain and our nervous system are always kind of wrestling with the fact that we are doing something dangerous.
Yeah.
But interestingly, often our kind of default self-protection mode, when that kicks in when we're on a horse, it actually leads to us behaving in a way that can make us less safe on the horse. So it's kind of like a strange, counterintuitive situation. And a lot of the work that I do with riders around fear is working with the nervous system to regulate the nervous system, but also better understanding what actually keeps us safe on a horse, safe as possible. And that is being less afraid and more in the present moment. It's an oversimplification, but it's counterintuitive to what our brain and body often wants to do when we don't feel safe.
Yeah, it's so true. And with that in mind, I'd be kind of interested to hear some of the common kind of misconceptions that you encounter with riders when it comes to mindset work. And also you mentioned a couple things there that can help to keep us safe, but you also mentioned that often our brain and body go into things that make us less safe. Can you maybe highlight a few of those for anybody listening?
Of course, yeah. Common misconceptions, I suppose, in terms of mindset. You've actually highlighted a few already. One that I see all the time in riding is this idea that we shouldn't be afraid, that a good rider is a not scared rider. And we often use the word brave, but I think we have this idea that being brave means not being scared, which I disagree with, but it's very entrenched in the culture of equestrian sport to be brave, not be scared. We all can think of the riders we grew up idolizing or looking up to, and we rarely saw them talking about being scared, if ever. They all were, as it turns out, of course, because all riders manage that to some degree, but it was never talked about. And so that's a huge misconception. Another misconception is that people are they don't realize that confidence is something they can develop within themselves. They can label themselves quite early on as a non-confident or an anxious rider. And then that can actually become almost like part of your identity as a rider in a really unhelpful way. And learning that you're not, just because you have been anxious doesn't mean you are an anxious person and there's nothing you can do about that, can be a big mindset shift for people that then kind of unlocks the ability to then be like, okay, well then what can I do about it? How do I develop my confidence and become a confident rider? So that's really common. And then the other really interesting mindsets are often about the relationship we have with our horse. Riders worry a lot about ruining their horses, having a negative impact on their horses. And that's grounded in a misconception that us making a mistake here or there can actually have like a really serious negative impact for the horse. Horses are far more resilient than that. So that fear of hurting our horses or having some kind of negative impact on their training can really hold us back and create a lot of low confidence and self-doubt. It's based on kind of incorrect thinking that we can challenge, which is the case with most unhelpful mindsets, that when you really shine light on them and you understand them, you can easily, maybe not always easily, but you can always find a way to challenge them and rewrite the story in a way that helps you to see what you're doing in a different light and ultimately a more helpful light.
Yeah. Well, and so much of this stuff, simple, not easy.
Exactly.
So when we learn that we can challenge these things that are holding us back, regardless of what they are, and regardless of where they're showing up, we can start to integrate and incorporate practices to navigate through them and come up with counter narratives and things like that. It's amazing, though, you're right, how often people assign themselves these labels. And then once you've done that, what is the impact when somebody assigns themselves a label? Like, I'm an anxious rider, and they go forward in everything sort of embodying that. What kind of impact do we see versus when they start to counter it, do you find?
Yeah, the impact is that they can often sort of lean into being an anxious person. And what I mean by that is that they get more easily caught up in anxious thinking. They see themselves as fundamentally sort of less capable, I find. And so they more easily identify with stories such as, I can't do that, I'm not brave enough to do that, I could never. And so that has like a limiting effect. They'll try fewer things. They will typically have a lot less fun riding, which is something always makes me sad to see. They will experience sometimes almost like a constant state of anxiety when they're in the saddle, or even in anticipation of lessons or riding. They can struggle with a huge amount of anxiety. That is, as I say, kind of lean into that, and it can feel right to behave in a way that aligns with who you believe yourself to be. The biggest impact is that they're just very unlikely to ever change their own patterns because they don't actually see that that's possible, right? If I am fundamentally an anxious person, then it's like, that's it.
So,
right? I just have to somehow cope with it. So then when that narrative gets challenged and we realize that that's not an ongoing truth that we're stuck in, then typically you see people being able to be more curious about what's possible as kind of a start. They are more willing to engage with tools that will actually help them to start thinking differently and then feeling differently in the saddle. So they start being able to prove to themselves through trying different things that, it is possible to not always be afraid. It is possible to have fun with this again. It is possible to maybe progress faster than I thought I could. It is possible to try something that I never thought I could try. It just sort of opens all these doors. And then the cool thing about confidence is that confidence is built through experience, right? Successful experiences. If you have a story that you say, I could never jump a jump. And then you change your thinking and you start to feel less panicked in the saddle, which gives your brain and body the capacity to go, okay, I can't handle this new thing that feels a little scary. And then you jump the jump. Your brain is never going to forget that, right? Like, oh, wow, like I did that thing that felt really hard. And that immediately bolsters your sense of belief in, oh, maybe I am someone who can do hard things. And that has this compounding effect. And it's not always perfect and linear like that, right? There's often a lot of steps forward and a lot of steps back. And especially people who've struggled with anxiety for a long time, they'll often have like a surge of progress after their initial work with me. And then they'll be doing really well until they encounter some kind of extra difficult situation. And then they can commonly kind of slip back. But then they typically find their way out of that pretty quickly. It's like a momentary falling back into old patterns because something really difficult or challenging occurred. But then that in itself becomes a confidence building experience too, because they go through that and they realize, okay, even if I fall back in my mindset and that anxiety comes back, I can find my way out of that. I'm not stuck there.
And I think for us to realize that no state is permanent. So you're not an anxious person, you might be feeling anxious, and that can change. And you can also go back to being anxious, but it can change again. And knowing that we are actually the ones in control of that because we're capable of engaging tools and tactics to calm our nervous system. Same as we might do with a horse. We can help them go from sympathetic to parasympathetic processing. So fight or flight to rest and digest. We have a lot more capacity than we often realize as humans. And it's so interesting. I feel like in animals, you see them operating so genuinely a lot of the time, and they're not really concerned with the goings on of the outside world in a way that kind of dictates who they are as a being. They're just like, I am who I am. Like Tigger, she wants what she wants and she gets it most of the time. But it's so interesting to me how as humans and our cognition, how it works, we can tell ourselves these stories. Those can really keep us trapped in ways that we don't even recognize. And they can be really insidious. It's not surprising that people end up having a little bit of a backslide because patterns are hard to break. But once we learn we can do hard things, we learn, okay, we can actually get out of that. And it's through repetition and constantly proving to ourselves, oh, hey, I can do this thing. Well, now I've built up this bank of proof. I did that hard thing and I did that hard thing. And I did this thing I didn't think I could do. So I can probably get through this as well. And I feel like those pieces, they're all just building blocks to help us become whatever we want to become. And it's always interesting to me to see in life as well as in sport, how much the stories keep us trapped, keep us really unhappy and not having fun when we really could be. And I love that you pointed that out because that was one of the biggest things that I noticed as I got older. And one of the things that I see constantly is people are not having fun. And I get it. There's lots of things. The cost of the sport is increasing. I think the relative stress level as a result of that is increasing. The relative health of horses seems to be decreasing. So there's a lot more variables at play. But at the end of the day, there's still so much that we can do internally to help improve the outcome of joy or of fun in what we're doing with horses. I mean, they're silly. They're awesome animals. So engaging with horses can be so joyful. And it's always interesting to me to see, okay, where along the line has somebody totally lost that joy of being able to interact with this magical being and like has gotten so wrapped up in the seriousness of it or so wrapped up in their anxiety around it and that sort of thing. I think what you're doing is so powerful because we need more of that. Like people are putting so much into the sport, but I do worry that people are not often getting back a lot in terms of just fulfillment and joy and love and community and being able to like go for a ride with a friend and just have a good time. It's great that we're getting more into things like this. And I love just the advancement of the sport in these ways and having help from professionals such as yourself.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Wonderful. Yeah. I'm curious, why do you feel otherwise capable riders seem to suddenly lose skills? I know you mentioned this happened to you when you had some falls and then started getting some refusals, and I see it happen all the time. What are some of the things that go on behind the scenes there?
This is one of the I find the most interesting areas of sports psychology can kind of illuminate for us. It can help us to understand what's going on, because for anyone who's had this happen, they know what a deeply kind of unsettling and confusing experience it is to be able to do something one day and then, well, there's two versions of this. Either you experience sort of a sudden disconnect from the skill, which is similar to my story, or the other version of this is that you just find you can't do it the same way or as well under pressure, typically at a competition, or it could also be at any high pressure situation where maybe you're at a clinic with lots of auditors, so there's a lot of eyes on you, and that can really mimic the pressure of a competition.
Or even if somebody in the barn is watching, like I know I used to get really just like and feel like I had to be so perfect if anybody was watching. It can come up in so many different areas, even if people aren't competing, right?
Totally. Yeah, well, it's very common. And once we understand why it happens, it's really helpful to then being able to kind of break out of that pattern when you experience it. So the kind of fundamental piece underlying that is that our motor skills are mostly governed by our unconscious mind once we learn them. There is sort of 3 stages of motor learning. The first stage, you are a total beginner and your brain is just desperately trying to piece together what it is you're trying to do, right? So it feels messy and you feel uncoordinated and you're not sure if you're doing it right or wrong half the time. And you make a ton of mistakes and you are just generally, you feel it's not a very comfortable place to be, right? And that's why a lot of, especially adults, will often avoid learning new things because that initial stage can be so uncomfortable and we can hate feeling like a beginner again. And then the second stage, your brain starts to like connect the dots more. So like quite literally in your brain, like neurons are forming stronger pathways associated with what it is you're learning because you've practiced it enough times. You start to understand more what you're trying to achieve. You can usually tell if you're doing it right or not right. Your timing gets a little bit better. And then you get to the third stage, which is where your brain's created really strong pathways associated with that movement, and not just the movement, but also like the appropriate timing, when to do that movement, etc. What's cool is that when you get to that third stage, you don't require as much conscious attention to do that thing anymore. It's happening automatically or semi-automatically. And this is really essential for a sport because this is part of the reason we can layer skills and build expertise and become like very good at something as complex as riding a horse. Because once a certain skill set gets to the stage where it's largely unconscious, that frees up your conscious mind to grapple the next layer, to think about the next layer. We don't realize it, but as we are learning and practicing how to ride a horse, we have all these layers of skills that we're using and accessing without necessarily thinking about it or not being all that aware of it. When we're not under pressure, this system works really well. When we're riding, let's say at home, by ourselves or in a lesson, we are just kind of letting that unconscious learning do its thing. We're accessing those skills really smoothly and there's no interruption. And our conscious mind is often focused on the next thing that we're learning or the refinement that we're making or whatever feedback our coach is giving us. Therefore, our conscious and our subconscious are working really well together. And that's really optimal for performance, right? Yeah. What changes when we add pressure is that our conscious mind, it's actually useful to think about our sort of like 2 parts of the mind for this. There's like the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. If we were to kind of characterize them, the conscious mind is the part of our mind that cares about looking good, winning, or if that's important to us, getting a certain result. That's a part of our mind that says, oh, so-and-so's watching. Right. I need to look good right now. Our unconscious mind is completely unconcerned with that. And this in terms of motor performance. The part of our unconscious mind that's governing our motor skills is just like, when do you want the skill? Is it the appropriate time for the skill? Great, activate the skill. They don't care who's watching. That part of your mind doesn't care if it's a competition or not. It's very black, in that sense, very black and white. When there's no pressure, our conscious mind is kind of happy to let our subconscious mind run things. Sure. Introduce pressure and our conscious mind goes, uh-oh. Now I have to perform. Yeah. Right? Now there's a certain result I have to achieve or I have to look good for this certain person, so on and so forth. Then our conscious mind suddenly stops trusting our unconscious mind to do its job. And how that kind of plays out is that we start trying to think about and consciously control skills that have actually been taken care of by the subconscious mind for a long time. What doesn't work about that is that our conscious mind has way less like manpower than our unconscious. It doesn't do a great job of trying to like claw back control over those movements and skills from the conscious mind. It's kind of like it can be like a bit of a control thing. It's like now it's like because we feel the pressure's on and we have to perform, we start to try to control our performance more. And it just doesn't work very well. It interrupts what is a very effective, efficient system, and it slows it down. If we think about our conscious mind, we think we can think quickly in our conscious mind, but we think way faster in our subconscious mind. Our timing is slower and clunkier when we're trying to control something that is like a learned skill. It just messes everything up. Yeah. The whole system kind of breaks down, and our experience of that is, I can't, why isn't my leg doing this thing? Or I'm tense and I can't sit the trot suddenly, or it's hard to understand almost in the moment what's going on. We just experience it as this isn't working. I've lost my skill. I can't do this thing that feels easy in another environment. So you let me know, did that explanation kind of illuminate that part of your question?
Yeah, big time. I think it's really interesting to hear all of that. And as you were speaking, I was like, okay, so how much of these perceived fears or anxieties are actually control versus legitimate fear? It's the fact that suddenly we are trying to take conscious control of previously subconscious things, then we're messing them up, and then we feel more anxious about it. Yeah. Versus being anxious and that being the problem.
Yeah. I know. It's like messy and complicated and hard to understand. Typically, what happens then is as we start to realize that things aren't working, we try to force and control our performance even more. Yeah. We overthink even more. So it becomes this like very unhelpful, self-propelling kind of cycle. Yeah. And what we actually need to do, which can be very hard to do in the moment, is to sort of let go, not think as much or not think at all about what we're doing, and allow our subconscious mind to do what we've trained it to do. Often to do that, we have to, it's sort of a combination of things there. We need to give our conscious mind something productive to focus on so that it doesn't try to interfere and control what's going on. Sometimes I use the analogy of if you've ever been in university or high school where you had to do like a group project, and there's like one person who, maybe I think I was this person, who would like really need it to be done right, and so they would just take on way more of the project than they needed to because they would rather do it all and have it done right, but from their perspective, then trust it to the other members, right? Yes. So that's same. Yeah. Exactly. A lot of equestrians can relate to that, actually. Sure. A lot of us are like, oh my god, that was me. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That one. It's kind of like what our conscious mind is doing, right? It's like all of a sudden it's like looking, at the other members of the team and going, I don't trust you to do that.
I don't know about you.
So I'm just going to take care of this. But meanwhile, I often say, like, if our conscious mind was an organization, it would have like 5 employees. If our subconscious mind, just the part that governs our motor skill, was its own little organization, it would have like 50. There's just more manpower. So you can imagine 5 people suddenly trying to take on 50 people's work. Yeah. It's not going to go very well.
Such a great way to look at it. And it is amazing just how often that doing everything ourselves or trying to take control of everything can really make every part of our lives so much more difficult. And I think it is such a common characteristic that we see in horse people. Yeah. And, I think people who are inclined that way, maybe we are inherently a little bit more anxious. I always wonder, okay, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, when it comes to the types of people that are drawn to horses. Yeah. But because horses are so soothing and we're able to co-regulate with them and our heartbeat just automatically syncs up with theirs. So I feel as though people who are maybe high achieving and a little bit more control oriented or a little bit more anxious tend to be drawn to horses. And so it's interesting to kind of see how that plays out in other dynamics in the sport. But it is so common that they're the ones that are doing absolutely everything around the house. They're doing absolutely everything everywhere because either they're afraid to outsource it in case it doesn't get done properly, or they're just, they just need control. They need to maintain control. Interesting to kind of contemplate how that plays into how we're then overriding our subconscious and trying to take control in the saddle in times when we perceive it to be of higher importance.
That's what always triggers it, right? This is more important.
Right.
That this, now I have to perform a certain way in this moment is usually what sets it up. Well, the other thing that sets it off, which is more related to the story I told at the beginning, is when we have a scary experience or something, or we have a failure, a type of failure.
Right.
And that causes us to suddenly lose confidence in ourselves. And the conscious mind is saying, oh, I don't trust you guys to do this for me anymore because you let me down, essentially, in a key moment, right? And you didn't see the distance on the cross-country course and we got a weird jump and I fell off. Now we can't trust you guys to take care of this for us. And so we're going to try and control it. So it can be born out of a scary or confidence kind of bombing experience, which we have a lot on horses because of all the variations that we can't control. And the thing is that even if we've trained our subconscious mind to see a distance, it's not perfect. Right. There's always going to be times where the factors are different, right? If I think about that fall that I had on the cross-country course, there was all sorts of factors at that jump that, you could argue were slightly new. So had I trained, it was a very tricky turn. It was like a little bit of a downhill angled approach. There was all these things. One of the challenges of cross-country is that you don't actually get to train cross-country a whole lot. You do a lot of training in an arena or you get a little bit of time out on the course, but not as much as you do with show jumping training. It can be really challenging for your brain to generalize the skills you've learned in an arena in a very different kind of context to a cross-country jump that's like sitting at a crazy angle, and there's like a thing there. And essentially my brain just sort of failed to generalize in that moment, which is fine, it happens. But because I didn't understand that, and because it happened twice in a row, my brain, my conscious mind I lost a lot of trust in my body to do the right thing at the right time. And so those are really hard moments, right? Like it's hard to let go and trust your body when you feel like it's important and you need a certain result and there's a lot riding on it. And it's hard to let go and trust your body when you've had this immediate experience of it not working that resulted in you potentially falling and either hurting yourself and or just all the embarrassment and frustration and disappointment that comes with falling off at a major competition. Like you said, simple but not easy. Simple to explain it all and understand it, but it can take a lot of practice to be able to recognize what's happening in the moment and let go and trust. Yeah.
And those things I think are tough at the best of times for people because we're accustomed to being in control of the vast majority of things, and people tend to be quite linear in their way of thinking. So if I'm in control at work and I'm in control at home and I'm in control when I'm driving my car and I'm in control when I'm handling my horse, then I should be in control when I'm on the horse. I should be in control of myself. And unfortunately, that's just not always the case. Control is a bit of a myth sometimes. That's interesting. Now, we've talked a fair bit about subconscious versus conscious mind. I'm curious how the nervous system plays into all of this. Could you really dig into that for us a little?
Yeah, the nervous system is, I suppose, first and foremost, in the context of what we've been talking about, the nervous system is an unconscious system. So we don't activate it consciously. So I don't say activate, be scared. We can make ourselves scared by thinking about scary things, but that's your subconscious reacting to the fact that you thought about a scary thing as opposed to you turning on the system. So back to your point earlier about people apologizing for being nervous, it's not something you're consciously controlling or choosing, right? So it's absolutely not something we need to apologize for. It's just something that happens. It's a powerful system, largely because it's a big part of how our brain keeps us safe. So it's theoretically, I suppose, worked for many hundreds of thousands of years or millennia. And so that's why we still have it. And that's why most animals have it, right? We're not alone in that. And certainly, most important to think about in this conversation is that our horse also has a nervous system, right? And which is very similar to ours in a lot of ways. Well, the nervous system is a system that controls whether or not we are afraid and everything that comes with that. When we're in a dangerous situation, our brain activates certain responses that are designed to protect us. And in many dangerous situations, they do, in fact, protect us, right? So it's not a useless system. It's something that does actively keep us safe. In that sense, I always like to reframe for riders. I think given the kind of cultural norms that we all grew up with, we often see fear as a problem. We see fear as the enemy, almost like something we need to fight against, banish from our brain. And I find it's really helpful to reframe fear as like a helpful resource in your brain, or a helpful aspect of your brain that is key for riding. It does help keep us safe. It helps us make smart decisions. It helps us slow down and reassess when things you're not 100% sure if it's safe to continue. And those are all good things. So a lot of times people will call me and say, I want to not be afraid anymore. Can you help me with that? And I always say, I can't, and I won't, because that would actually be a disservice to you. But we can certainly help you feel more balanced with your fear, help you feel more in control of your fear, because although fear is helpful, it can also become overreactive, and it can be triggered in inappropriate times where we're not actually in danger in the moment.
Yeah.
And that is what happens to equestrians a lot, is that we have inappropriate fear reactions in the moment. You know, someone who is sitting on a horse that's fine, that's calm, and they're asked to go canter over a jump, and then their heart is beating out of their chest, and they feel frozen, and that is an inappropriate fear response, because actually that person is safe, as safe as one can be on a horse, right?
Absolutely.
In that moment, right?
Yeah.
Because our nervous system is so easily activated by our thinking, equestrians often find themselves in a pattern where they are very afraid in situations where they don't need to be afraid. And that complicates riding.
Sure does. It sure does. And it was interesting at the event that you were speaking at recently. You did an exercise with the group where you just described something slightly scary. And it was amazing because, of course, all of our nervous systems were just like, panic.
Totally.
And I don't think it was horse related, but just something scary. And so it's really amazing how powerful the mind is, and that subconscious nervous system activation. Even just the thought of something scary evokes more fear and evokes a physiological response as if we are in danger. It's amazing how that can then impact everything we do. And you had mentioned earlier, so often it actually makes us less safe because if all of a sudden our body is in fight or flight, guess what? You mentioned our horses have nervous systems too. They pick up on that and they're like, well, there's something to be scared about here, so shit, I guess we're going to be scared together. Let's get out of here.
Exactly.
And they may or may not choose to take you with them. So it is amazing how often we can kind of create this self-fulfilling prophecy with our fear. And if it's allowed to take over and we don't have tools or techniques to be more in balance with it, as you said, it really can start to worm its way into all sorts of aspects of our lives and our riding, our horsemanship, that sort of thing.
Yeah, super common experience. And what's so incredibly hard about it is that because it's not something we have conscious control over, people can feel very out of control with it and feel almost like helpless. And that's such a frustrating, demotivating experience for riders.
Big time.
To feel like I'm just constantly afraid. And it seems to be just getting worse and worse. And now my horse is getting tense, and it's just, I'm stuck in this pattern. And most of us don't know where to start to break that pattern.
And it's like most things, it is a very specialized, unique skill set that we need to go to a specialist to learn and to figure out those things, because I would guess it's also quite different for everybody in terms of what their specific fears are, what might trigger it or bring it on. How much does that change the way you approach it?
Not as much as you may think, because you're right, everyone's like stories or perspectives or certain things that they're afraid of are often can be different. But fear acts the same way regardless of what has triggered it. So whether I'm afraid because I don't want to look stupid in front of so-and-so, and you're afraid because you fell off last week, funnily enough, though we're likely to be experiencing similar things physiologically, even though my fear is actually more mindset based, right? And your fear, we could argue, is a little bit more experience based because you actually just had a scary experience experience, hypothetically,
Yeah.
versus I'm worried about how someone's perceiving me. However, at a certain level, our nervous system just sort of treats all threats as equal. And so that is why we can get such a powerful fear response to something that actually doesn't threaten us in any physical way. So someone's opinion of me has no true physical threat to my well-being, but it feels like it does because, well, the theory is that because we evolved to be so socially dependent on groups early on in humanity, that our need for social approval is very strong, and any threat to that can feel like a threat to our survival.
Absolutely. Interesting. I think a lot about these things because even in modern times, even though we're not as dependent as we used to be when we were in kind of smaller tribes and things like that, from an evolutionary perspective, we are still so reliant as humans on other humans for our survival. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a job, we can't make money. If we don't have a partner, everything in our life tends to become harder. We have more expenses, we have more burden on us. If a child in some way upsets their parent, there's this interesting concept of we're constantly, as children, forced to either choose our attachment or our authenticity. Because if we're behaving in ways that are not favorable to our parent and they let us know, like, hey, that's not acceptable, and they withdraw love, or they put us in the corner, or they ground us, send us to our room, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know, I need this person for my survival. And now I'm forced to choose, okay, do I in the future act in the same way because I'm feeling that way? Like, do I cry because I'm scared or sad or upset or overwhelmed? Or because I got reprimanded for crying, do I now have to stuff that down in order to maintain the connection? And so there's a lot of attachment theory around this because it really does start at such a young age. And then everything that we encounter throughout the entirety of our lives really sort of follows a similar trajectory. If your boss doesn't like something you've done, well, you probably won't keep doing it, even if it's something that's really authentic. If somebody doesn't like the way you speak, or if somebody doesn't like the way you look and they're criticizing you for it, often we're inclined to change that because we know that being ostracized from community is harmful to our well-being. And so it really is interesting because they've also found that kind of leaving behind of self or abandoning of our authenticity in favor of maintaining the connection, it actually does a lot of harm internally to our mental state and our emotional state. But I feel like we're often in these positions where we're choosing, like, I need to look good for that person, or I need to impress my coach, or I need to impress the judge, because to not do so often does have other implications, even if they aren't real. To our nervous system, it's sort of all the same.
But understanding the difference can be helpful because we tackle those fears differently. So I like to categorize them as rational versus irrational fears. Irrational fear is, I got bucked off this horse the last time I rode it. And so that's like a rational fear. Like, okay, there is a chance that that could happen again. And I need to understand the factors that I can influence to maximize my safety, right, in that situation. And I need to, if I do choose to ride that horse again, you need to be able to regulate your nervous system's very valid response to a scary event, right? And so when you're dealing with rational fear, you always need, it's good practice to kind of slow down and assess and recognize the choice that you always have. Because you don't have to get back on that horse if, in fact, that horse is not a safe horse for you to ride.
Right.
And sometimes we forget about that as riders, right?
It's
like,
true.
get back on the horse, right?
Yes.
And lots of times it's totally safe to get back on the horse because the thing that happened is just one of those things that happen with horses, right? However, mindset of just never be afraid, I know in my past has caused me to get on many horses that were actually not safe horses for me to be riding, given my skill level and given where that horse was at in its training. And the behaviors it was exhibiting genuinely probably wasn't safe, right? And I'm sure a lot of riders can relate to that.
Absolutely.
I always like to encourage, like, okay, if it's a rational fear that's grounded in something that was kind of like a genuine threat to your safety and your well-being, physical well-being, it's always good to just pause and just assess and be like, okay, I have a choice. And what can I do to increase my safety here? So if I am going to ride this horse again, maybe it would be safer if I had someone here with me for that first time, right? There's so many different things we can do. And then if we decide to go forward and we're sure that we're kind of as safe as we can be, then it's going to be a matter of regulating our nervous system. So I'll come back to that in a second.
Okay, fabulous.
And then, but the other path, the irrational fears, we kind of need to tackle those differently because they are purely coming from the way we're thinking about something. So if we can recognize that, like if we're genuinely afraid of looking bad in front of someone or somebody's judgment of our riding, it doesn't matter how much you deep breathe. If you can't change the way you're thinking about that, that fear is going to stick with you, right? So that one requires us to actually challenge the kind of the heart of the fear and the rationality of it. We have to tackle that and approach that in different ways. One way with people judging us is that it's helpful to recognize that someone else's opinion of you is not an accurate reflection of your performance or what you've done. In other words, you could go have the ride of your life and there could still be someone in the bleachers sitting there going, that wasn't very good, or I didn't like the way she did that. Because people's opinions of us are not, they're not accurate reflections. Sometimes that's a liberating shift for people. They realize, oh, actually, I can't control how other people see me by doing things really well. You know, and so then we can start to sort of set our own standards for what good enough looks like based off of things that we have control over. And also recognizing that there's so many stories that our brain can create that feel so true. And yet when challenged, it is possible to actually realize that they're not as true as we thought. That is a practice that's fascinating. I find a lot of people get really curious about that. Once they've challenged a few of their kind of core limiting beliefs, they're like, oh, what else do I believe that's not actually true, that's creating all this anxiety for me, right? And then it's kind of fun. You can start to get really curious about it and actually enjoy the process of being like, okay, no, that is not true, or that doesn't have to be true. I don't need to think about that way. So that process is the biggest factor with irrational fears, I find. But if we come back then to, well, what if we have a rational fear and we've controlled all the things and we decided to get back on the horse, but we're on the horse and we're in a state of fear? That's a really tough situation to be in. Two things typically happen. We get tense and kind of reactive in our body, which, as we know, doesn't work super well on horse. No. And the other thing that happens, which is so challenging, is that our brain will often start to generate images of terrible things happening, us falling off, the horse taking off, all sorts of things. I actually had a really interesting experience of this at the beginning of this. Oh no, it was this summer. And so I had been riding a horse at a particular barn last summer and had quite a bad fall. And what had happened was that the horse had exploded from a walk. So he had kind of like something, I think a bee had stung him. I'm still not exactly sure. And we were walking on a loose rein and then he just sort of went 0 to 100, exploded forward, did a big buck and launched me. I didn't ride. He ended up actually ironically getting sold like the next week. So I never actually rode him again. And I didn't ride at that arena again until the following summer. I ended up riding a different horse somewhere else. Fast forward to this summer, and I'm on a completely different horse, and I head back out to this arena, and I'm quite scared. And I'm noticing that I'm getting these mental images of the horse that I'm on taking off and me falling off. So perfect example of irrational fear that actually didn't resurface until I was back in the environment that the fall had happened in. That's something to be conscious of too, right? Is that sometimes we associate risk with specific areas and specific experiences. Well, I had to do what I'm about to explain now myself to kind of move through that. And as a combination of using my breathing to calm the physical impact on my nervous system and help me be more grounded and centered in my body. But I also had to very intentionally focus on positive visualization, which was I had to replace the images my brain was sending me with images of things being fine. So I had to actively picture a calm, balanced canter where the horse was not gearing up to explode underneath of me. It's interesting, right? Because it's easy just to describe that in terms of what I didn't want. But the key to positive visualization is being able to build an image based off of what you do want. So I had to think about, well, what do I want this canter to feel like? And picture that very intentionally in my mind. in order to build my own sense of, I can do this, I can ask this horse to canter. Once you do it enough times, then you start to get into that self-proving cycle, positive cycle, where you're like, oh, okay, well, actually, that was a nice canter and it was totally fine. And then that helps your brain let go of the old fear. But yeah, like being able to, those are the two key skills that I find are often most helpful in those situations, is learning how to breathe properly, so that you're regulating your nervous system, and then which helps the horse as well, not be triggered by your fear.
Yeah.
And then getting really engaged with your thinking in order to flip the script.
Yeah. As you're describing that, I feel like positive visualization is different than just think positively.
Yes,
Don't
it
worry,
is actually very
everything's
different.
great.
Yeah.
Can you, I know you kind of dug into it a little bit already, but can you maybe give any other distinctions between positive visualization and just thinking positively for anybody who's listening and might want to try that out?
Yes. So positive visualization is building an image or a movie in a way in your own mind of what you want to have happen. And that's quite distinct from positive thinking in the way that we typically refer to it. So what I mean by that is positive thinking is often used to describe this idea of like, just think confidently, or be more cheerful, be more upbeat. And that can play a role at times in positively impacting our mindset, certainly, but it's typically not a very effective tool in fear situations, because it's too big of a mental jump to go from I can't do this, I'm super scared, to I'm great, everything's fine. It just doesn't resonate for people because it's so not what they're actually feeling.
That makes sense.
Positive thinking is really just helpful thinking in the moment, right? What we want to train ourselves to do is to not worry about going to this super like upbeat positive place, but more just start to ask ourselves, like, what do I want right now? Or what am I actually capable of in this moment? How can I remind myself of the skill and ability I do have? How can I clarify what I want to have happen next? How can I think through how to accomplish that? And then how do I for myself of my own ability to boost my sense of confidence in my ability to go make that happen. Positive visualization is part of that, where you essentially create a mental image of what you want to have happen. And it can be as simple as, what do I want my next halt to look like? In my example, I was using it to picture just a single circle, like 20-meter circle of canter, just one, and just the transition up into that and then the transition down out of it once I've completed the circle. It sounds simple, but what most people find when they start trying to practice this is it's quite hard, because our brain so easily and naturally pictures what we don't want. And it can take quite a bit of practice to start to build an image that is actually what we want.
Yeah, our negativity bias is so strong.
Super strong.
Especially when there's fear involved or anxiety around something.
Yeah.
Because we're just going to naturally be more inclined in that direction. But I think that's so helpful. And you did that with us in the exercise after you gave us the scary thing. And we were all like, oh, now picture just like the most beautiful, lovely, soft canter. And we were all just like, oh, we're doing it. It just felt so nice. Yeah. And it was amazing, the power of that positive visualization to counter the fear response that had just been triggered, that was very noticeable and palpable for all of us in the audience. It was really such a fascinating example of how quickly and effectively we can shift our nervous system state, and we can shift our mindset just by bringing in a totally different picture, but making it detailed. We're not just picturing a canter. Now we're picturing like the most lovely, soft, rhythmical, balanced canter.
Yeah.
And we're, as riders, like, we're crushing it. Our leg is stable, we're balanced, our elbow is soft, and everything is just flowing. And that just gives such a different feel in our bodies. And I definitely find for myself as a rider, the more that we can embody that, better everything becomes, because then the horse is just like, oh, perfect, you're like butter up there, I'm going to be like butter too. It just all starts to flow so much more easily. And it is amazing, the power of the confirmation that we can do it to then fuel our confidence going forward.
Totally. Yeah. And as a tool, we've been talking about it mostly in the context of managing fear, but it's actually a really great tool for performance as well. If you're trying to accomplish something in any ride, taking the moment to visualize it positively. So what do you want, either before you go and try it, but also while you're actually doing it? I do this in under saddle sessions with people. They'll be cantering around and I say, okay, now just like picture the most beautiful balanced canter, riding that while they're actually cantering, and the canter improves and it feels like magic to the person. But it's because as you're picturing that, your nervous system regulates, and it sort of like activates all those motor skills that we've talked about before that are there, and helps them be used in the most effective way. It's like reminding your body what it is that you want to have it do, right? And how you want it to do it. So it's a really fun thing to play around with, even in a ride where there's no fear.
Yeah. And using the conscious mind to really bolster the subconscious skill set that's already in our body.
Yeah. The key thing is that you just picture it, you visualize it, but you don't like try to force it. And
Beautiful. Those pictures are so powerful. And of course, as you're envisioning the best canter you've ever had, you're not rigid. Nothing's rigid. You're not holding your breath. Everything is just flowing and soft and rhythmical. Naturally, everything will follow suit in accordance with that. When we stop focusing on what's not working or what doesn't feel good or what we're afraid of, what they're doing wrong, we perceive them to be doing wrong. Very cool. I love that. So I'm curious, we've kind of talked about when we already have fear, or if something kind of comes up, and how we can practice, say, improving our canter as we're cantering. What if things start to unravel mid-ride? Are there any things that we can do to improve the situation if we're already in it and things are suddenly going a bit sideways?
Which happens all the time.
It sure does, yeah.
we all know that feeling.
Like, oh no. It's all going horribly wrong.
And it can be so challenging. You come into the ride with a specific goal in mind, or you wanted to work on something and it's just not working. And there's so many different reasons that could be so, right? It could be, I won't even start to list them because we all know there's so many. Regardless of the reason, the most common response that we have in those moments is frustration. We get super frustrated with ourselves and also sometimes with the horse, right? And it's not that isn't a valid response. Like you are truly in a frustrating moment. You're trying to do something and it's not working. You may not understand why. However, frustration, while it's a totally valid initial response, what we want to practice is learning how to not stay stuck in frustration, because frustration from a performance perspective is very unhelpful. When we're frustrated, we typically get upset. It evokes a lot of other emotions, which can in itself kind of low-grade trigger our nervous system. So we're more likely to be tense and a little bit on edge. And there's really interesting research that shows that it actually kind of reduces the communication in our brain. So when we're in a frustrated state, the activity of our brain reduces, and it actually kind of centers down around the amygdala and the area of our brain, like the limbic system, where our emotions live, so to speak. Now, in contrast to this, when we're in a state of curiosity, our brain is like connecting and communicating across all the different parts of our brain. And that supports problem solving and finding solutions, which are key in moments when things aren't working. So one of the coolest and fastest tools or tricks to manage frustration is to move yourself into a state of curiosity. One of the best ways to do that is to start asking yourself really good questions. And I like this approach because you don't, like sometimes people are like, well, I don't know, how do you just like make yourself curious? It's simpler than that, because if you have good questions to ask yourself, you will naturally trigger or evoke curiosity, because our brain likes to answer the questions we pose it. What I find is that you want to get a good sense of like sometimes I call them like good quality questions, because not all questions are created equal.
Of course.
You could ask yourself a question that sounds like, why can't I do this? It's not a helpful question. So your brain will answer that question. It will probably answer it in a pretty negative way. It'll say, because you suck, because you're not good enough, because, so on and so forth. A good quality question is a question that helps you to truly problem solve. And it's a question that helps you tune into like what's possible, and attunes you to connecting with your horse and kind of reconnecting with yourself. So a great example of a good quality question is, how do I just make this 1% better? It applies in almost any situation, right? And it helps you get curious. Immediately, your brain is going, well, how do I make this one? What is 1% better? Now we're thinking about it in small stages of improvement. Another one that I love is, how do I help my horse learn or understand what I'm asking him or her? Great question, because it helps us think about the horse's experience with a little bit more compassion and recognize that they're probably not doing what we're asking because they don't understand, not because they're actively resisting us out of spite.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, they don't understand or they can't. Not like they're trying to make you look stupid or they're trying to annoy you or they're just a jerk.
Yeah.
We hear those things all the time.
We do.
Yeah. And it's tough because so often it's our lack of understanding and maybe not asking the right questions.
Yeah. Yeah, modification of the horse's
Yes.
mental capacity.
Yeah,
Right?
totally.
And it does us a disservice because it almost creates this narrative where you're having like an interpersonal conflict with your horse.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is only one sided.
Yeah.
The horse is not having an interpersonal conflict with you. It's just responding to what's happening, what your state is at the moment.
And it's amazing how much that conflict does start to build, though. It's interesting how just us coming kind of a conflict-oriented way, they're just like, they get really
defensive.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Reactive, depending on the horse,
Yeah.
or more worried.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and so it can absolutely feel like they're resisting us and all those things. So there's so many examples of good questions, and I always recommend riders have like a couple almost like memorized in their pocket, in their back pocket, so to speak, right? So they can pull out in moments where they realize they're getting frustrated. And even just a really simple one, you know, is what's not working and what could I try next? What could I try? What have I not tried yet?
Yeah.
Right? Or another good one is, how much is my inner state influencing this situation? The exact question it's not that there's one question that always unlocks every situation, but I find that when people learn that curiosity is something they can access quickly in the moment through asking themselves good questions, and they will experience very quickly quite a powerful shift in how they're feeling.
Yes.
And it's very reinforcing because it helps us to find a way forward, which feels good.
Yeah.
And so I've had so many people relate to me that that's been a game changer for them just in their day-to-day riding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I can't remember when I started incorporating that shift into my riding. Probably around the same time I started getting like really curious about saddle fitting and like why it was so hard and why so many people and so many horses were having so many problems. And so many horses are like locked in their jaw and popping their shoulder and bulging their rib cage and uneven in their pelvis. And then you see the riders getting frustrated and I'm like, this is all feeling very familiar, you know, is recognizing like, oh, I get frustrated when that happens too. Yeah. And then you see trainers and they're just like hauling on that inside rein and like put their nose to their tail and the horse is just like, I can't, they're almost falling over. And I started to get really, really curious about all of the things that I was doing as a rider and the frustration. Like I used to get so frustrated when I was riding and I stopped riding for a long time because that's like, not fun. It had lost all joy for me. And it was interesting because my journey back has been varied for sure because I don't always ride if I don't have a horse or if I don't have time with my businesses and everything that I've got going on. And I feel like if I can't be consistent, I don't want to be doing it. But the switch to curiosity was such a game changer because all of a sudden the horses just soften. They're like, oh, you actually are trying to solve the problem instead of bullying me into it or starting the dispute that they then have to try and manage and work through. When you're in a tense, tight, agitated state, you're not doing anything to help them. So they are then just trying to manage everything that's going on inside of them and with you. And it is interesting to me just how little that is the norm. And frustration is so the norm. And frustration then often leads to escalation. And shockingly, then we don't get that beautiful, soft, happy result that we're looking for. Yeah. And we leave and we're like, well, I didn't have a good time and your horse didn't have a good time. So why are we doing it? But when you start looking through the lens of curiosity, it's so transformative because I see people like their horse cannot bend this way. Well, can they bend that way on the lunge? If they can bend that way on the lunge and they can't bend that way under saddle, guess what? It's a rider issue. or saddle issue.
Yeah.
You know, maybe strength and balance too, often lots of different pieces, but so often we're trying to solve a problem that we don't understand, and our response is frustration as opposed to curiosity.
Yeah.
But when we get curious and we understand the problem, we are so much closer to being able to change it for the better and create a positive outcome for the horse, for ourselves, and for the team.
Yeah,
which
totally.
is huge.
And something that underlies our quick slip into frustration, I think, as riders is in my experience that most of us have a fear or a belief pretty close to the surface that we're not actually good enough.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And so then what happens is any moment of challenge where things feel like they're not working can feel like confirmation of that fear, the kind of deep, dark fear that we're all carrying, that actually we're not good at this, that we're not good enough to be doing it. And that can mean that in those moments, we're not just getting frustrated about what's happening, we're also experiencing a deeper fear about who we are and what we're capable of, and like a very kind of high level or deep level, depending on how you think about it.
Yeah.
And in the context of something that's really important to us that we've put so much time and energy into, and we desperately want to be excellent at.
Yes, the stakes feel really high a lot of the time with riding.
So curiosity is a super powerful tool. Supports us, I find, to be able to make that switch more often is also to work on those deeper beliefs about like, what does it mean to be a good rider? And take some time really thinking about what that really means, because we typically don't spend a lot of time thinking about it.
No, it's so true. Or we look at it as like, you know, it's to be polished and perfect and sharp.
Yeah.
But is it? Like, is that all that it is?
Yeah. And I would argue, no. So much of the time when you dig into it, we find that people are defining being a good rider based around things that they don't actually have a lot of control over.
Yeah.
Not making mistakes, other people approving of me, never falling off, winning all the time. Those are all things that we do not control over them, but certainly no control. And so it means that our foundation of worthiness is on unstable ground all the time. And so if you can get really curious about that and find a better definition of a standard that you're defining for yourself that represents good enough. And like certain things I find are really powerful are saying, well, no, I'm not going to set an expectation that I never make mistakes. That's unrealistic and actually a disservice to me because I have to make mistakes to get better. Instead, I'm going to set a standard around how do I manage mistakes? How do I handle mistakes? I'm going to do that really, really well. And I want to understand what that means.
And maybe even what led to the mistakes. Like, was I taught to do things in a way that actually isn't helpful? Was I taught something that doesn't work for me or doesn't work for the horse? Have I been practicing something, or do I have stiffness in my body? So there's a lot of pieces even wrapped up in that. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. We take personal responsibility often for things that it's just not helpful to blame ourselves for them. And we just always want to be able to kind of accurately assess where we're at. Can be helpful to understand why we are that way. It's regardless of why we are that way, it's just about understanding what's working, what's not working, and then like moving forward from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Well, I know we've got to wrap up for today, but I am so grateful that we got to have this conversation. I feel like we could probably talk for hours, so we might just have to have you back if you're up for it. I would love that. Now, Annika, where can any of our listeners find you if they are interested in working with you?
So probably the easiest way would be to go to my website, which is pretty easy. It's just my name, AnnikaMcGivern.com. You can contact me through the website. You can also find me on Instagram at AnnikaMcGivern.performance. So you can always reach out to me there. For anyone who's interested in like a quick resource that they can access to kind of dig in a little deeper to this, I have my own version of a podcast. It's not a podcast like this. It's 6 episodes that are designed for riders to listen to on their way to the barn. So they're just like 20 minutes, and they're kind of just like a get your mindset orientated kind of listen. And so some people may find that useful to kind of re-engage with some of the things we talked about today, and also as a tool to just help themselves kind of arrive at that moment when you're mounting your horse in as good a mental state as you can be.
Fabulous.
So that's called Ready to Ride, and it is on most podcast places, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, and we'll link all of this in the show notes for everybody so that they can find you easily. Yes, because I feel like so many people could benefit from the work that you're doing. And even if it's just something that we're using to ensure that we're actually enjoying the sport that we're putting so much time and energy and love and money into, that we actually love it at the end of the day. Because I feel like that's something I notice a lot, is the love for the sport, the love for the animals really decreases when our stress levels and our anxiety levels and our fear elevates.
Yeah.
So how can we shift that balance so that it all just becomes a more enjoyable experience for everybody?
Kicker is that typically when we're having more fun, we ride better, we
Yes.
perform better. It actually can really help to find a way to make it all a little less serious. Everything.
Yes, that's fantastic. I feel like I used to be so serious and take myself so seriously. Even just shifting away from that, it's like, that's not the life I really want to live. I want to have fun. I want to enjoy. I want to have rich experiences where I'm not like, oh, what's somebody thinking of me? Because that just doesn't serve us. And it really does take away a lot of the authenticity and a lot of the joy. And I feel like we all need more of that in our lives. Realistically.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. And thank you everybody for watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay unbridled, and thank you for watching. Take care, everyone. Bye.